think of your left hand and your right hand as an enantiomer. How can we draw the enantiomer of this molecule? Mirror image, we have an enantiomer. Now the hydrogen, bromine atom at the wedge, it has one chiral center. It's going to have one enantiomer. So how can we draw the enantiomer of this molecule? What we need to do is draw the mirror image of that molecule. So let's say the red line represents a mirror. So here's the carbon atom. We have a CH3 that should be faced in this mirror because we have one here. And then we have a hydrogen atom in the back, a chlorine atom at the top, and a bromine atom at the wedge. So that's how you can draw an enantiomer of a molecule. You simply need to draw the mirror image of that molecule. Now let's identify the configuration of each chiral carbon atom. So the group with the highest priority is the bromine atom because it has the highest atomic number. And then it's the chlorine atom, and then the methyl group, and then the hydrogen. Now the hydrogen is on the dash, so it's where it needs to be. So it's going into the page, which is what we want. So all we need to do is count it from 1 to 2 to 3, ignoring 4. And so what we have is the arc. Configuration, since we're rotating it clockwise. Now the enantiomer needs to have the opposite configuration. So bromine is still going to be number 1, chlorine is 2, methyl is 3, H is 4. So we're going to count it from 1 to 2 to 3, and so we're going counterclockwise, and so we have the S configuration. So whenever you have one chiral center, you automatically have an enantiomer. And the enantiomers will always have opposite configurations. If you have a molecule with 2 chiral centers, then to draw the enantiomer, simply reverse both chiral centers, their configurations. And make sure that the molecule doesn't have a line of symmetry. Otherwise, it could be a meso compound. Here's another example that you could try. So go ahead, and the enantiomers will always have opposite configurations. If you have a molecule with 2 chiral centers, then to draw the enantiomer, simply reverse both chiral centers, their configurations. And make sure that the molecule doesn't have a line of symmetry. Otherwise, it could be a meso compound. Here's another example that you could try. So go ahead and draw the enantiomer for this molecule of symmetry. Otherwise, it could be a meso compound. Here's another example that you could try. So go ahead and draw the enantiomer for this molecule. So let's draw the mirror first. And this time the chlorine is going to be faced in the left side as opposed to the right side. And then we have the bromine at the top. And then the hydrogen is facing away from the mirror. And then we have the methyl group, which we could write it like this. Now let's assign the configuration to each chiral center. So this is going to be group number 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this time the H is on the wedge. So because it's coming out of the page, what we need to do is we need to reverse it. So if we count it this way, 1 to 2 to 3, it appears to be R, but because H is in the front and not in the back, we need to reverse it. So what we have is the S isomer. Now for the chiral center at the right, this is number 1, number 2, 3, and 4. So we need to count it from 1 to 2 to 3. And so it appears to be S, but H is in the front, so we need to reverse it. And so we're going to get the R isomer. So as you can see, the configurations are opposite from each other. Now go ahead and draw the enantiomer for these two Fisher projections. So feel free to pause the video as you try these examples. So let's start with the first. first example. So let's draw the mirror. All we need to do is basically reverse hydrogen and fluorine. Is going to look like this. Hydrogen was on the right, now it's on the left. So you just got to reverse the groups in a Fischer molecule, two substituents. And so that's how you can draw the enantiomer for that molecule. The wedge. All you need to do is put it on the dash. And so that's how you can draw the enantiomer for that molecule. Try this one. So let's say we have two substituents, a bromine atom and a chlorine atom. Go ahead and draw the enantiomer of that molecule. So the bromine is on the wedge, just reverse it and put it on the dash. The chlorine is on a dash, now we need to place it on the wedge. And so that's a simple way in which we could draw the enantiomer without drawing or using a mirror. Try this one. Draw the enantiomer of this molecule. So one way is we can draw the mirror image of it. And so here we have a wedge. So that's how we can draw the enantiomer of
Mm-hmm.
of that molecule. So the bromine is, and so that's the molecule. So one way is we can draw the mirror image of it.
Leia here from LeiaForSci.com, and in this video, we'll start the discussion on RNS configurations for chiral molecules. You can find this entire series along with my practice quiz and cheat sheet by visiting my website, Leia Carbon, where the S atoms that you have nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, period 3, phosphorus, sulfur, chlorine, and then going down bromine reactions. But here's another reason to know them. This is the order that we're going to use to rank these atoms. The atomic is your absolute one of one because it has one proton, no I'm ranking my. Not think about it. Look at 4, because again, we only care about the top 3 priorities. We put number 4. We'll start with a simple example looking at 2 chiral carbons where the substituents are the same, but the order is slightly different. I'm including the little cheat guide so you can see the ranking of atoms, but I want you to memorize it so that you have this ingrained in your head. Let's start with the structure on the left. Anytime you see hydrogen, that is always number 4. Nothing can rank lower than hydrogen because it's the lowest atom. Even deuterium outranks hydrogen. So when you have a hydrogen present, you know it's number 4. And when you don't have deuterium, which is often, the next absolute lowest atom is carbon. And what's the absolute? We don't have to think about it. And step 4, we're going to trace an arc from 1 to 2 to 3. An arc from 1 to 2 to 3. Everyone has their way of doing this. I like this one of R as the right way of the clock, and S is counterclockwise. It's not the right way of the clock. And that's the absolute simplest type of structure. Number 1, the molecule C. But what if it's not this simple? What if you have multiple atoms to look at where it's not that easy to rank in one shot? For example, what if the molecule has a CH3, a CH2, CH3, and here we'll have a CH2OH, and let's put a bromine. So we look at the atoms and we see we have carbon, 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 and bromine. Bromine outranks all the carbons. Great, that's priority number 1. But how do you know to rank the other 2 carbons? And this is where you have to, what I call, go deep into the molecule. Comparing that to exactly the same, for the highest priority, from 1. Or that we already knew from our trick, but just in case now you understand why it's number 4. Step 1, rank. Step 2, make sure number 4 is in the back. Good to go. Step 3, cancel out number 4, and now trace an arc from 1 to 2 to 3. And in this case, it's counterclockwise. The top does not go to the right, so it is not R. Instead, it is S. But what if your molecule doesn't look this pretty and isn't set up this nicely? What if you're molecule in 1. Put it as an invisible number 4 because we know it's there. It's the lowest priority. We're going to cross it out anyway. Just keep it in the background as a number 4. So let's rank. We have an oxygen, which we're comparing to carbon and carbon. Oxygen outranks carbon, making the alcohol priority 1. The two carbons are the same. They cancel out, but remember you have to look at what else is on the chain. It has a carbon on it. The methyl group, remember, it's always second to lowest if you have a hydrogen present. That is priority number 3, and we already have number 4. We prioritized, made sure number 4 is in the back, cancel out number 4, and trace an arc. Line structure. For example, 2-butanol, where you have an alcohol on carbon number 2 and you're asked to find if it's RNS. We're going to go through the same 4 steps. Step number 1, rank. We have our little cheat guide. We identify the chiral carbon, the sp3 hybridized carbon with 4 unique substituents. Wait, 4 substituents? 1, 2, 3. Where's number 4? In line or skeletal structure, don't forget you have invisible hydrogens. And instead of writing invisible hydrogens, I'll put it as an invisible number 4 because we know it's there. It's the lowest priority. We're going to cross it out anyway. Just keep it in the background as a number 4. So let's rank. We have an oxygen, which we're comparing to carbon and carbon. Oxygen outranks carbon, making the arc from 1 to 2 to 3. The top of the arc goes to the right, giving me R. Now what happens if priority number 4 is in the front of the molecule and cheat sheet? Use the link below or visit orgosecrets.com to grab your free copy. After downloading your free copy of my ebook, you'll begin receiving
con-ingle because this a 2-carbon molecule because this carbon is connected to 4 different groups. It is connected to a hydroxyl group, the implied hydrogen, which I'll go ahead and draw right now, a 2-carbon chain, and a 1-carbon chain. 4 different groups, that is a chiral center. Now, what we are going to need to do is we're going to need to assign priority to each of those 4 groups, and we're going to do that by assessing atomic mass against the chiral, because that is the priority 4. Then we're pitting a carbon atom versus a hydrogen atom, and because carbon is heavier than hydrogen, that means that this carbon is going to get priority 2 over this one, which will now be priority 3. Now, I just want to reiterate what we have just said because this is often a point of confusion. I want to stress the fact that as you assign priority via this convention, you must go one case. We have one coming towards us. We would have to do something to either redraw the molecule or rotate the molecule in our minds or do some other trick which we'll discuss later. But for the time being, let's just be happy that that's already away from us. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to make a circle from group 1 to 2 to 3. So here's 1, here's 2, here's 3. If the circle went clockwise, then that is an R stereocenter. If the circle went counterclockwise, that would be an S stereocenter. So these are the two absolute configurations for any chiral center. Because we have determined that this is clockwise and therefore R, that means that this is R to butanol. So we already knew that this was 2-butanol based on our knowledge of IUPAC nomenclature. However, now we are able to assign the extended formality of the absolute configuration because this is going to be either R or S, and in this particular case, it is R. Now, you're probably going to have to assign absolute configuration on a number of different kinds of chiral centers, and it may not always be the case that the lowest priority substituent is already away from you. So we're going to have to be able to assign absolute configuration regardless of how the substituents are oriented in space or on the paper. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. For one, let's look at the opposite of the example we just looked at. So this is a chiral center, but in this case, the lowest priority group is towards us. So we are not in the privileged perspective to be able to assign absolute configuration. So there's a couple things we can do. If you are very good with spatial orientation and that kind of thing, what you could do is simply place yourself in a different position in space mentally. So for example, if I was on the other side of this board, looking back this way towards you, then I would be in the appropriate orientation because this hydrogen atom that is projecting towards you right now would then be away from me. And from that perspective, I could see that bromine, ethane, methyl, that would be S, that would be counterclockwise from my perspective behind the board. However, a lot of people are maybe not as comfortable with that, and so there's other tricks that we can do. For example, we can arbitrarily switch the bromine and the hydrogen and place the bromine on the wedge and the hydrogen on the dash. Now this is sort of a cheat because we're redrawing a completely different molecule. But what we're doing is we're saying that if I switch the bromine and the hydrogen, it is going to be easier for me to assign the absolute configuration because now I can just look at it the way we're looking at the board right now, and we can go like this. That looks like R. So, but the thing is that we have inverted the chiral center to the opposite configuration. So if we do this kind of cheating method, what we're going to have to do is invert the answer we get. So we swapped them. The swapped molecule looks like R, therefore the original must have been S. Okay? So we can kind of swap things to make it easier for ourselves, but then we must invert our answer. Because it is the case that if you switch the position of any two groups on a chiral center, you will invert the stereochemistry of that chiral center. So let's take a look at another example. Here, now it's the case that the lowest priority group, the hydrogen, is in the plane of the board. So it's not going to work. Switching the dash and the wedge bonds is not going to help because that is not going to be changing the positioning of the lowest priority group. Now again, if you're very good with spatial reasoning, what you can do is orient yourself in a position to imagine that the lowest priority group is away from you. So imagine I'm sitting in the plane of the board and I'm looking this way. Now the hydrogen is away from me, and I can see that the bromine is up here. The chlorine is down and to my left because this wedge bond projects the chlorine out this way, and then that fluorine is down and to the right. So I'm seeing bromine, chlorine, fluorine from my perspective. that looks like S. Now, once again, not everyone is comfortable with this kind of reasoning. So what we can do is apply the same rule that if you swap any two groups on a chiral center, you are going to invert the stereochemistry of that chiral center. But if we say, for example, switch the hydrogen and the fluorine. Now, the reason we would do that is because if we place the lowest priority group away from us, which would be the case if it was on the dash bond, that would be furthest away from us. So we can arbitrarily swap the hydrogen and the fluorine like this, and now, simply by looking in the direction towards the board, we are able to assess what's going on. And so we would see bromine, chlorine, fluorine. That would be clockwise, so that appears to be R. However, once again, if we do this some kind of cheating thing like this, we have to then invert our answer. So in inverting the stereocenter, we made something that looks like R. That means that the original must have been S. So when you are assigning absolute configuration for a chiral center where the lowest priority group is not already away from you, you have two options. You can change in your mind where you are located and the way you are looking at the molecule if you're very good with spatial reasoning, or if you are not, you can swap any two groups in that chiral center. But then you have to realize that what it appears to be after you swap them, you must then invert to get the absolute configuration reflective of the original molecule. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials, and as always, feel free to email me with questions, ProfessorDaveExplains@gmail.com. So if a compound has one chiral center, it is chiral overall, and it will exist as a pair of enantiomers, one having R configuration, the other having S. But if a compound has two or more chiral centers, we're going to have to analyze a little bit further to tell if a molecule is chiral or achiral overall. So let's take a look at something like this. We have two chiral centers here, right? Because each of these carbons is connected to four different groups. For example, a chlorine, the implied hydrogen, and then two different carbon chains around each side, because in this direction there's a chlorine atom that is not present on that direction, so those are different groups. Now, if we reflect this across a mirror plane, this is what we're going to get. And then if we rotate this 180 degrees in the plane of the board to try to be able to place it back on the original, we are going to see that it is not going to work. This is not going to fit because a dash chlorine will be on a wedge and a wedge chlorine will be on a dash. Therefore, these are non-superposable mirror images. They are enantiomers of one another. Therefore, this molecule is chiral. But what if we do something as simple as just changing this dash to this wedge? Now, what we're going to see is if we reflect across the mirror plane, this is what we're going to get. We turn this 180 degrees, and we find that this is flawlessly superposable. So the mirror image is identical to the original. Therefore, by definition, this is achiral or not chiral. However, it does still have two chiral centers, and you ought to be able to assign absolute configuration to these two chiral centers. So this means that it can be possible for a molecule to have two or more chiral centers with their own absolute configurations, but be achiral overall. And in fact, there are special terms to designate why, and in this case, it is because this is something called a mesocompound. A mesocompound is a compound that has an internal plane of symmetry. What that means is because the top half of this molecule, when reflected across this central line or plane, does in fact give accurately the other half of the molecule, that means that this is a plane of symmetry. Therefore, it is a mesocompound, and any mesocompound is achiral or not chiral. So if you want to see whether a molecule with two or more chiral centers is chiral overall or not, you can either examine for any kind of planes of symmetry, or as always, you can simply go ahead and reflect across the mirror plane, see what you get, and then investigate as to whether the result can be superposable on the original. So there's another kind of internal